good that you have reached the best.
I'm so sorry.
So, Fernando?
Can we start now?
Yeah.
Okay. Professor, I will speak in Portuguese with my colleagues, sorry. Okay?
No problem.
Bom dia a todas e todos. É com muita alegria que a gente começa as atividades desse dia, que celebra o 10º aniversário da ANEGEPE. A gente está muito feliz de ter a presença de todos vocês aqui. Eu falo em meu nome, em nome dos meus colegas de diretoria, Rose, vice-presidente, Edmilson, diretor científico, Jane e Márcia na secretaria e Raul na tesouraria. A gente conta com a presença de vários ex-membros das diretorias anteriores, o que nos deixa muito felizes, né? Vocês receberam a programação, viram que a gente vai ter essa palestra inicial do professor Michael Frese, depois teremos um painel com as ex-presidentas e a professora Ilka, vice-presidente, falando um pouco da história da ANEGEPE, da evolução do campo. Às 13 horas teremos a segunda palestra do dia e à tarde mais 2 painéis, né? Essa programação foi montada assim com muita dedicação, muito esforço. Na abertura do primeiro painel, eu quero mostrar para vocês o nosso selo de comemoração, que alguns já viram, outros não. Então, eu ia fazer isso nesse momento, mas para não causar dificuldades para o professor Michael Frese, a gente faz isso na abertura do primeiro painel, né? Então, assim, sem mais delongas, eu queria só realmente agradecer a presença, dar todas as boas-vindas, desejar que permaneçam conosco durante toda a programação. Vocês viram que é uma programação seguindo um horário inglês, né? Das 9 às 17 horas, com 1 hora de almoço de intervalo, né? E passo, então, a palavra para a Rose, que vai conduzir essa primeira parte, essa primeira palestra. Obrigado a todos.
Bom dia a todos. É com muita satisfação que nós temos conosco o professor Michael Frese. O professor Michael Frese, ele tem uma longa trajetória e uma participação em diversas universidades, quer na Alemanha, Holanda, Estados Unidos, etc. Então, eu vou ler só uma pequena síntese do currículo dele. E, atualmente, o professor Michael Frese, ele é professor na Asia School of Business, que tem uma colaboração com a MIT Sloan Management, e ele é professor de psicologia, particularmente em empreendedorismo e inovação, na Leuphana University of Lueneburg, e está de licença de lá, né, no departamento de Management e Organization. Ele também é dessa NUS Business School, que é a National University of Singapore. Ele é autor de cerca de 200 artigos em periódicos científicos, 200 capítulos de livros e cerca de 30 livros e edições especiais editadas, cerca de 80 palestras convidadas, cerca de 430 palestras científicas, e ele é classificado entre os 5 maiores em publicações entre os professores de gestão alemães, segundo o BWL, que é o Handelsblatt-Rankings, 2012-2014, e entre os 5 economistas mais citados na Alemanha, segundo o Scopus Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung Ranking on Research, nos anos de 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018 e 2020. Ou seja, vocês têm uma pessoa realmente que é top ranking internacional, tá? Eu cheguei a conhecê-lo já desde, acho que 99, acho que na primeira conferência que eu fui ao Babson College, e também vi lá algumas apresentações de alunos dele estudando o que ele vai apresentar para nós, que é uma Action Theory of Entrepreneurship, com vários estudos de alunos deles em vários países, sobretudo na África. Professor Michael Frese, you are telling to our colleagues about only a synthesis of your curriculum, and I was talking to them about the title or the subject of your speech for us today, an action theory of entrepreneurship. Please, the floor is yours. And after your presentation of 50 or 55 minutes, we will be taking the questions from our audience. In this part of questions and answers, Fernando Jimenez will be helping me. Please, the floor is yours. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here with you, even though I wished I were with you in Brazil, quite frankly. Not because the weather isn't good here in Malaysia, but I just love to be in Brazil. I like the country, and I liked every time I've been there. So I'm really pleased to give a talk to you about an action theory of entrepreneurship, which is an exciting topic, even though it sounds very dry. Let me just add very briefly that I have one slight problem, and that is that there is actually a translation by Professor Tupinamba of an article of mine that was published about 10 years ago. And so in case you want to read it up in Portuguese, it was a book chapter of mine in a book on psychology of entrepreneurship. We just published a new book on that. And of course, the chapter that I wrote on action theory has advanced, I hope, has changed at least. So, but anyhow, I want to talk about this theory, and in a way, it's in the most basic form. It says entrepreneurship is characterized by active actions, by high agency, by people who are active more, and the more you're active, the more you are going to be successful. So that's, in a way, the most basic idea of the theory of action of entrepreneurship. This sounds extremely simple and even trivial, but it's not when you actually look at the details. And then it becomes extremely interesting and a little more complex as well. So let me just show you the slide. I don't want you to actually recognize everything in the slide. It's impossible to see it. You just see a slide that shows all the factors that were, from a psychological point of view, related to success. I'm not going to talk about that, except that I take out one part of this slide and talk about action characteristics. And in a way, what you're seeing now is these active personal initiative, these active goals, etc. This is what I will be talking about today. I will start with an empirical study. So I don't talk about the theory right away. So the empirical study is on poor people in developing countries and whether or not it makes sense for them to get a good training and what kind of training is good for them. I'm going to rely a bit on Reynolds 2012 when I talk about which kind of group are we talking about. There is a group, it's not a group. There are 210 million firm creations as we speak. So there are about 100 million people among the 1.8 billion midlife adults who live on less than $15 a day, who are currently starting a firm, and 110 million who are managing a new venture. So we are talking about a sizable population. So now the empirical study that I will describe right now was published in Science, and most of you know that Science is a very good journal that is relatively highly publicized and relatively highly cited. And you see the heading. The heading says, "Teaching Personal Initiative Beats Traditional Training in Boosting Small Business in West Africa." So let's look at that. Meaning, boosting psychological training means personal initiative training, which has three components. First component is self-starting. So I start myself. I don't just look for others. I don't copy others. I think what I do myself, future-oriented. I think about future opportunities and problems and prepare for them now. I overcome barriers. If there's anything that every entrepreneur everywhere in the world will underwrite and will say, yeah, that's correct, it is difficult. There are barriers, there are lots of problems on the way. Let's talk a little bit more about the meaning of self-starting. So it's different from the normal, the obvious approach. It is doing something that you do yourself, and it is often innovative. Future orientation, of course, does not necessarily imply the next 5 years, but think a little bit more about what could be opportunities in the next few months, few years. How can I prepare for them? But what could be problems, and how can I prepare for them too? Meaning of overcoming barriers is I don't give up, and I really deal with the barriers that are thrown my way. However, sometimes I also produce barriers myself when I'm frustrated, and then I also have to deal with my own frustration and maybe anxieties. Okay, 2 trainings were compared with each other in this study. Personal initiative training, we already know it's about self-starting. We know it's about innovation and opportunity identification. You don't yet know that it is high and challenging goals. And I will talk about PI, which means personal initiative, a bit more. Financial planning is much more bootstrapping oriented than trying to get credits from a bank. Feedback is use of feedback, actively looking for feedback and overcoming barriers. The other training was the so-called business training. It's called business edge training, really. And it is one that was developed for the needs of developing countries. And it has the typical parts that any good business training has. How to do accounting and financial management, how to calculate cost and the cash flow, how to do commercial management and marketing, the 4 Ps, how to do segmentation, human resource management, how to do human resource management, understand the taxes and the advantages of formalizing the business. Okay, so the study was done in Togo, and it's a randomized controlled experiment with 1,500 participants. So in each group, there were 500 participants. 500 participants in the business training, 500 participants in the personal initiative training, 500 people in the control group. There were 2 years of measuring the success of these businesses afterwards. So 5, 9, 17, 29 months after the training. The training was done by local trainers who were trained very carefully by the 2 approaches, the traditional business training and the personal initiative training. The sample, as I said, 1,500 people, that's a sizable number in a city of less than 100,000 people. About 50% female, 41% years old, average schooling 8 years, manufacturing, commerce, service, all included. Mean number of employees, about 3, average firm age 12, and mean profit 145 euros. These are the results of comparing the different programs. So the business training, can you see that? Because I'm going to show you, this is the traditional business training and that's the personal initiative training. Can you see it? Okay, what you see here, I'm gonna jump over this one. You see that the monthly profit rate.
Yeah, we can see. We can see.
Okay, great. You can see that the monthly profit rate is 125,000 CFA, while the monthly profit rate of the traditional business training after the training is 106. The control group has a profit rate of 96,000. So what you see is it's significantly better, the personal initiative training, than the traditional business training, and it's significantly better than the control group. You also see the weekly profits here, and it's the same picture there as well. So now we want to know a bit more of why, how could it be that this training is better? And why is this training so much better? So the first question is always, are they using the best business practices after the training? And the answer is neither. The traditional business training, which focuses on business practices, nor the personal initiative training is significantly better than the control group. But the personal initiative training didn't focus on the business practices, so we are not worried about it. But for the business training, it's a big problem. Why are they not better? Innovation index is much, much higher in the personal initiative training, which is not surprising because we are focusing on opportunities, on new ideas, on innovations. We are long-term oriented and we are self-starting. Product and service diversification, it looks very similar, but there are significantly increases in diversification in the personal initiative training, again, compared to the normal traditional business training. So personal initiative training outperforms in each case, and it of course also outperforms in personal initiative itself. Also in capital and labor inputs, it outperforms, even though the traditional business training emphasizes how to get money from the banks. So if you look at it long term, you see that at the end of the 2 years, the personal initiative training is 57% higher in its profitability than the control group. The problem was, of course, that you would imagine that the traditional business training would at least have a slight advantage in a number of issues that are related to what they were teaching them, but it's not. So the sales don't go up, the business practices don't go up, and the only thing that happens is that they formalize more frequently, but formalization does not have a positive effect on profitability. Okay, so this is a randomized controlled trial, a randomized controlled experiment, and you know it by now because Brazil has been the place where many of the COVID medicine has been tested in randomized controlled trials. It's exactly the same procedure. So we have 1,500 people who say they want to learn. We tell them beforehand they cannot choose in which group they are going to be. We go by random, flipping the coin kind of randomization, and give 500 into the control group who don't get any training. We give 500 into the business training group who get the business training, and 500 into the personal initiative training. So from that perspective, we know that the groups start out equally. So everything is the same. Their personality is the same, their profit rate is the same, their approach is the same, everything is the same before the training. And once the training starts, they differentiate themselves. So this is useful. Of course, we don't have a placebo group, which you would have for the COVID-19 medicine. But in a way, we even had a placebo group because the business training is getting training. Yeah? So at least they should say, oh, I'm so thankful, I got a little bit better, etc. But you don't see that effect. It's like a placebo training, really. We did a similar study in Germany, much worse in terms of the design, and of course, much less, many less people, and we get similar results. We did another randomized control group design in Africa. Let me just show you an example of a success story, because sometimes it pays off to know to understand it better. These are the guys who got a training, and they did cheap saucepans, and they manufactured them. And after the training, the owner said, now I want to produce much more high quality saucepans and try to sell them in the upper, better market, which is often the supermarkets. So this is what he did. He went to the National Bureau of Standards and said, how are my saucepans looking? And they said, they look awful, quality is really bad. And then he went back and improved. Several times he went to the Bureau of Standards, which is very good in Uganda. This is a Ugandan case study. He finally got certified by the National Bureau of Standards. And they said, this is now high quality stuff that you're producing. He went with that to a wholesaler, and he got an order on 10 million Ugandan shilling that kept him busy for a year, and another neighboring company as well. So this is an example of a high success story of what happens after a personal initiative training. So now we want to understand what is theoretically going on. Why is it so successful at times, not always, but why is it so successful at times? And that's where the psychological action theory comes in. So the big issue of psychological action theory is that it overcomes the dualism between thought and action. In a way, action theory, it takes the brain and the hand. It looks at both of them. It's not just one. And it's so frequently that people sort of say, what is going on in the brain? What is going on in the decision-making process? And that's not the point. The point is, how is the hand with the brain related? Yeah? And this is the big issue of action theory and action regulation theory. So action determines human development, and actions also changes the human environment, and all of that is an active process. Now let's just take an example. You want to write an article, or you want to start a company. In each case, you sort of have an idea of what you have to do, but the gap between the idea and the actual doing is high, it's big, and there are lots of stuff where things can go wrong. And so I want to talk about all those things that can go wrong between the head and the hand, okay? In a way, between the head and the actions. There is I forgot to say this sentence here, there's a sequential and a hierarchical answer. Okay. The action sequence consists of goal, mapping the environment, planning, monitoring, and feedback. Let's talk about goals. Action is defined by a goal. You cannot act without a goal. You have to have a goal. A goal is a point of comparison, a standard, a cognitive set point, a comparison between the actual situation and the set point. It is a pull. A goal pulls you. It has a motivational function. A goal also produces anticipated future results. You can anticipate what it is going to be when you're there and where you are now, not yet there. What do you have to do? Which kind of travel you have to take? There may be internal goals and external goals. You may have the goal yourself that you want to start a company, or your parents tell you to start a company, or you are required to publish and that's why you publish. That would be an external goal. Some goals are better than others. We know from goal setting theory that high and specific goals are better than abstract goals. But it's not enough to have a goal, and I will tell you why not. This would be an example of a person who we cater to. This particular person did not go to the training, and it was a prior study that we did on personal initiative, and the person next to him is a former PhD student of mine. The reason why I'm showing you this PowerPoint slide is because I want to point out two very important things. What we did in the study is we started studying at one point in time, and then we restudied these groups, these people, 5 times every 6 months, so that we had all in all about a 30 months period of data from them. So the same people, and these were all people in Uganda who said, I want to start a business. So I am the one who wants to start a business. And then we asked them in the beginning, what did you do? And then we asked them again, 12 months later, what did you do? And then 18 months later, et cetera, until 30 months. So there are different spells here. Spell 1 means those are the guys who started the business in the first 6 months period. Spell 5 are those people who started the business much later. So like 30 months later. Now, the big issue here is you are only working on your intention if you actually have, and this is the important information here, if you're in the high action planning group. If you're in the low action planning group, nothing is happening. As you can see, there is no relationship between entrepreneurial goal intentions and new venture creation. So you have to have more than a goal. You have to have more than an intention. This is what is important here. You have to have a plan. If you want to go to Fortaleza, you need to have an idea of how to get there. If you don't have an idea of how to get there, you won't get there. You will just have the goal. So the plan is important. Same thing in a different set of studies where we looked at entrepreneurial goal intentions. Do you want to do something? And we looked at how much action planning they did. And then we looked at their entrepreneurial actions. So the important information here is, without goals, nothing happens. But with goals, it's not automatic that something happens. So the goal does not do automatically something. The goal needs to be in the mind, complemented by a plan. And the plan is at the same time the bridge between the mind and the hand. So only via the plan can I put one foot next to the other one to actually go in the right direction that I want to go. So the next point is mapping the environment. Mapping the environment means I have to look at the environment as if I do this more actively. Remember, we are talking about what does it mean to be active? What does it mean to be extra active as an entrepreneur? If I look at the environment actively, I will do much better than if I look at the environment sort of reflectively. What's the environment looking like? So, obviously, every action is situated in an environment. There are signals, there's information, there are others, and I have to have a good understanding of the situation that may be unconscious, but it may also be conscious, and I may actually do an information search. So we studied that by looking at entrepreneurs in Uganda. We often do studies in Uganda because I'm a visiting professor at the MIT University Business School in Kampala. So we looked at creativity, and active information search. Now, to be creative is, of course, important to be self-starting. Yeah? If you don't have any creative ideas, it's very hard to be self-starting. So, but at the same time, you also need to do active information search in the environment. And what you see here is that this literal model, path model, you have a path from active information search to opportunity discovery, from opportunity discovery to innovativeness of whatever you want to do new. And that one is predictive of venture growth. So you see that creativity is also important for opportunity discovery, but so is the interaction between creativity and active information search. So we have three paths that produce opportunity discovery. Information search, active, creativity, second, and creativity times active information search. Let's see how that looks like. So if you look at the active information search, that's these guys here, you have a high relationship between creativity and opportunity discovery. If you have a low active information search, you still have a relationship between creativity and opportunity discovery. But it's much, much lower, the relationship, as you know. The higher it goes straight up, the more it is a high correlation. So we now know the goal has to be active. The mapping of the environment has to be active. How about planning? Planning, of course, also needs to be active. And here we did a study in 3 different countries in Africa. This is an older study in which we looked at elaborate and proactive planning. And we had the following idea. Success would be related to elaborate and proactive planning. Motivational resources and cognitive resources would be related to proactive and elaborate planning as well. So what did we look at? We looked at informal planning of business. So this is not the same thing as a formal business plan. As a matter of fact, whenever I'm talking about planning, it has nothing to do with a formal business plan per se. Now, a formal business plan may help you to develop a good informal plan as well, but it's not the same thing. So informal planning means I have an idea in my head how I go from here to there. Business owners work in an unstructured situation. So that's particularly necessary to plan. And skepticism towards planning is very high in entrepreneurship research. There's lots of people who argue, but planning is nonsense because the environment is so unpredictable. How can you ever plan something? And the answer is, that's why you have to plan even more, because you have to have a second plan, a formal plan B, in case the first one doesn't work out. You have to think even better of what you will be doing, because planning will help you to sketch a path that you need to take. Now, there are also arguments that planning produces a certain amount of rigidity, and I think that's probably true. If you plan very well, you probably have some degree of rigidity. Now, it's not quite clear, though, whether or not rigidity implies that you cannot change the plan anymore. Of course, you have to change the plan if it doesn't work out. Yeah? So this is not so surprising that people are able to change plans. So anyhow, planning is important, so that's the argument. Now, why is it important? Because we can be better in developing future opportunities and problems and prepare for them. We can look better at potential new markets. We can look better at the use of scarce resources and not waste them. We can be better in looking at the environment and changing the environment, and we may have more unusual solutions. So elaborate and proactive planning then leads to success. And here you see that indeed elaborate and proactive planning was sizably related to the size of a company. So were cognitive resources. The motivational resources were not significant, but I think that's probably a sort of freak finding here in this case, because we usually find significant relations. Now, you could argue size is not a very good idea to measure for success. So we asked experts, and the nice thing was that at least in South Africa, we had sort of garages that were given to small businesses. And the guy who was supervising and managing these garages, he knew every business quite well, and he could tell us which one was successful and which one wasn't. And as you can see, the relationship between what they told us about their planning, and we asked them in an interview, in a detailed interview, was really strongly related to the expert idea. Now, the opposite of planning is a reactive strategy. A reactive strategy, I remember an interview that I led with I had with a woman entrepreneur in Africa, and she was telling me, "Oh, it's so hard. I'm you know, she was sewing things for nurses, and she said it's so hard to do that because every time I do something, somebody else has a slightly different way of sewing these nurse outfits. Some were showing a little bit more. These were female nurses, so a bit more. They accentuated the figure a bit more, and I don't know how to do that. I don't know what to do. Can you tell me, the person who was interviewing her, can you tell me what to do? This is a purely reactive kind of person. She was looking at what other people were doing and was trying to copy. Yeah? Of course, that didn't work out. And so when you look at the reactive strategy, you see very clearly that those who are high on the reactive strategy have a very low percentage of being highly successful. If you're very low, are you still seeing it? Yeah, okay. But if you're low, you have a 39% chance to be in the high, in the group of highly successful owners. But it's worse. In one study that we did in Zimbabwe before 2000, I must say, and also in Holland, we looked at the beneficial and the vicious cycle, and the beneficial cycle was planning leads to success, success leads to more planning, planning leads then to more success. And the vicious cycle was reactivity leads to non-success, non-success leads to reactivity, which again leads to non-success. So there is actually a cycle of problems and a cycle of opportunity. Feedback and monitoring. I'm going to talk mainly about feedback, even though monitoring is also important because of speed and accuracy, working memory issues. But let me talk more about feedback processing. Active or passive? Active feedback processing means I look for feedback. I examine my world around me for potential for feedback. Passive feedback is I see what happens. So positive and negative feedback. I am, of course, everyone loves positive feedback, but if I'm really good at it, I actually want to have negative feedback. Why? Because that gives me more chance to learn. In a negative feedback situation, I now know what is not good. If I just know what's good, it's not helping me that much to learn something new. So therefore, if I look for negative feedback, then it is better for my learning process. One of the best forms of negative feedback is errors. And that's why I'm going to look at errors. We have looked at errors on all levels, and we were always interested in two ways of thinking about errors. One was error management, and the other one was error prevention. Error prevention obviously stops the action so that an error cannot happen. Error management allows the error to happen, but manages the negative consequences that happen because of an error. Now, it's a different form. Obviously, people like to reduce the number of errors that they make, but it's a different form if I also think about error management, if I also think about what can I do to actually improve and deal with the error situation. Example, these are correlations of German small-scale business owners and their orientation to errors. And as you can see here, those who have action orientation after failure have a much higher performance. Those who are more competent dealing with the errors have a much higher firm performance. Those who learn from errors have a higher firm performance, not much higher, but a little bit. And those who feel strain, who feel stressed out by errors, have less firm performance. So this is another sign that the feedback is not used in the sense that you can use it, and that leads to a reduction in positive effects. Now, error management culture has been studied by us several times. We ask companies, is that true for you? For us, errors are very useful for improving the work process. After an error has occurred, it is analyzed, etc. And what we found in the Netherlands, in Germany, and in China is the same. Namely, whenever you had this kind of positive error management culture, you had a better economic performance. And it was around 20% of profitability. So if you had 10% profitability as average, the high error management group had 12% profitability. Those that were low had an 8% profitability. Or the other way around, we again look at people who are high on return on assets. This is an objective measure on return on assets. Those who are high on return on assets, you see that those guys who are high on error management culture have a 25% chance to be in this high asset return on asset group. If you have a low error management culture, you have a 6.25% to be in that. So what does that do, error management? Quick error discovery, quick recovery, quick help with each other, organizational routines of dealing with errors, open communication about errors, emphasize on learning, but also more innovation, because innovations are always related to how you deal with errors. Just think of all the medical advances that have been made because of errors that happened. The last one was in the COVID-19 area, where there was an error in giving the medicine, and it turned out that the error actually led to better effects on COVID-19 in terms of vaccination. Okay, so here is a study in German entrepreneurial units, software development firms, where we looked at the error management culture and their organizational innovativeness. As you see, there is a high correlation. And even if you take out these guys who are relatively extreme, it is still a high correlation between error management culture and innovativeness. So this is the action sequence. The action sequence goes from goals to environmental search, to planning, to feedback and negative feedback search. Then now we come to the structure. The structure of the action goes from again, remember, it's the mind and the hand, okay? So the mind is often thought of as being a conscious level. Of course, there's also an unconscious mind. The conscious mind sort of directs me and directs my hand. Huh? So how is this relationship between the two? And there's a hierarchical relationship, and often enough, those things that are physical are skill-based. We do them relatively routinized. And those that are sort of conscious, task-oriented thinking is often more head-based. Of course, that's an allegory, it's not exactly correct. So, I'm only looking at this one here, at this part, okay? And I'm looking at this part both from low to high, okay? Whenever something is wrong, I start to think about it often enough, and then I become more conscious about it. And going down, the more I'm learning something, the more it becomes a routine, and the more it is skill-based. Yeah? And so moving up and down the hierarchy is an important issue. Now you can cross the sequence with the levels of regulation: skill, flexible action patterns, and conscious regulation. And once you do that, then you get an idea of what happens in this interaction between hand and head, in the interaction between thinking about it and doing things. And obviously, in the more conscious form, it's complex plans, strategies, flexible action patterns, well-known action patterns with situational specifications, and obviously on the skill level, it's blueprints of elementary movement patterns. So, I'm gonna skip this and immediately come to the next point, and the next point is easy, because obviously the focus of action is often enough the task. We typically are task-oriented. Humans are thought to be social animals, and there are, but the usual way we do that is via tasks. But of course, we also sometimes only socially oriented. Yeah? But it's very seldom that we are completely socially oriented. And we are sometimes self-oriented in the sense of self-improvement or self-management. Now, if we are self-improving and self-managing, we are usually not very good in doing the tasks that we have to do at this point in time. Yeah? But in principle, that is something you need to do at times, often in times of crisis, that you are thinking more about, so where do I stand as a person, as an individual? All of that leads to a mental model that is action-oriented. An action-oriented mental model has an initial state, has certain work activities that lead to an end state. Let's go through the example again. You want to write an article for a scientific journal. Empty page is the beginning. End state is the finished article. Transformations process is, what do I know about writing the article? What do I know writing the article in such a way that it gets published? What do I know about writing the article in such a way that everyone understands it? Writing the article in such a way that it comes across as being interesting, etc., etc., etc. Many of these things are relatively automatic. We probably don't have to think about our own language, but sometimes it's very hard to actually know how to get these things done. So the action-oriented model then is the basis of regulation. Okay. Now we come back to the more applied issues: training and learning, learning from errors, expertise, going through the process of entrepreneurial actions. And I have 6 more minutes, is that right? On my watch, on my stopwatch here. So in the 6 minutes, I'm going to finish. So training and learning, the first thing is learning from errors. The typical thing that people who do training is that they say, I do the following. I let people act immediately. And once they act, they become better. Experience teaches you knowledge and skills. Another group says, I don't think so. I want people to first understand something well so that they have a basic knowledge and then they can act. And the interesting thing is both of these sentences are wrong. It is better to sort of say, you need to combine these two things. You need to combine the understanding with the acting, and through the acting, again, new understanding. But you should not do mindless action. Neither should you do just mind thinking without action. So, again, let me remind you on the errors. The errors, we studied errors and we studied a mindset. So if you have the mindset, I've made an error, great. There's always a way out of an error situation in a training. The more errors I make, the more I learn. Then you actually become better in performance. So these are two groups, and they both learn a software, and then they have a difficult transfer performance to do. What you see here, the error avoidance people, they don't learn much. The error training people, the error management training people who got these ideas, it's good to learn. It's good to learn from errors. Don't be afraid to make errors. They learn much better. But there's a third training condition, and that's interesting. The third training condition is you don't have these heuristics, okay? These are the heuristics. These are the mindset instructions. And if you don't have them, you're actually as good as the error avoidance training. You don't learn much, okay? So it is really important that you get a new mindset on the errors. And so therefore, one of the things that we always teach to entrepreneurs is, you will make errors, don't worry about them, because you know you will make errors. Better have a plan B available when you have made an error. In principle, errors with this instruction to be positive about errors lead to better emotion control and better and stronger metacognitive activity, more thinking about where am I, what can I do, and to better transfer performance. Okay. This is, by the way, used in firefighting and in pharmacists and cockpit research training, etc. So expertise. Expertise is also something where you have to pit the pure just do it against thinking about it and making sure that you do it in the right area. The expertise literature has been very, very strong that you have to really exercise very, very long. For 10 years, 6 hours a day is what Ericsson says. The best football players, the best philharmonic players have to do. But the trick is you do deliberate practice, and that is when you do practice in those areas where it hurts. So when you're doing the high notes on the violin, the more difficult reactions when you play tennis, etc. So that point then is, again, it's the same thing. It is where your connection between the hand and the head starts to click. This is where expertise is also developed. And now we can know a bit better why personal initiative works so well. But we can also know better why this training works so well that we developed. The training does the following. The first one is an action-oriented mental model. We do teach rules of thumb, principles of actions, and we say this is a better way to do it than another way. But the principles of action, I will give you a few examples in a second. The principles of actions are not recipes. They're just principles, okay? But of course they do learn by doing. active and exploratory approaches are necessary, but it's not blind and mindless action. Of course, the cognitive apparatus is built for action, and therefore it's easy. Once you connect it to actions, it's much easier to teach. They get both positive and negative feedback. As I said, negative feedback is particularly important, and we support the transfer into real life. We all know that it's necessary to routinize behavior. You have to go down the hierarchy that I described before. If you don't go down the hierarchy, your head is clogged up. You don't have that many resources in your attention, in your conscious attention. And so you have to routinize things. Of course, in training, you always have to worry about people who already have routines, and they often use those routines. These are all examples of relationships between personal initiative and success. We can quickly go over them. In the end, we have a facet model of personal initiative. Let's look at the facet model. We have here the action sequence, and we have here the facets of personal initiative: self-starting, future orientation, overcoming barriers. And now we can develop a training relatively easily by saying, look here, here is self-starting of goals. Here is self-starting of developing environmental knowledge. Here's self-starting of planning. Here's self-starting of feedback, etc. And we can walk through all of these things and develop ideas on each one of them. And that's exactly what we did. So this is the more elaborate version of it, where you see action principles in each one of those things. And I just show you the action principles for action planning. These are action principles for planning. And you need to be self-starting. You need to be able to execute the plan without having to wait. You have to be proactive and future thinking. You have to overcome barriers, and you have to know that. You have to develop plan Bs. You have to write down actions and action plans. You have to keep the goal intact and rather change plans appropriately. And while doing all of that, you have to be creative. And you should develop a 6-month plan, or at least a 3-month plan for the future now. If you look at all of these things together, then we have a content. So action theory leads directly to the idea of personal initiative. Then we have content from the theory to the personal initiative. But we also have the process of going from theory via training, learning to better performance. And both of them stem from action theory. And that's why I think it's a really useful and practically useful and theoretically meaningful theory that helps us to understand entrepreneurship. And I think it's the centerpiece of entrepreneurship that means self-starting, overcoming barriers, and thinking of the future opportunities and problems. And these are the countries where we did research in personal initiative and entrepreneurship in some form or another, not always in the same sense of doing the initiative training. Thank you very much. And I have used 3 more minutes than I was supposed to be using. And I can now answer questions.
Okay. Thank you very, very much for your very insightful and very rich presentation. I think it'd be provoking our researchers here a lot. Maybe a lot of them are not so familiar with this theory, but in the way you presented and also presented the results that you have reached with this action theory trainings, I bet that a lot of them will be eager to know a little bit more about this theory and how you present this training for people, especially for these entrepreneurs that are in very poor countries or semi-developing countries. Fernando, can you help me with the questions? I had to go out from the screen and I'm not able to reach back the questions. I know that Ilka had written a question. Okay.
We have four questions, Professor Frese. Okay. I'll put one at a time, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, the first one is from Edmundo. And Edmundo asks you to, looking back to Uganda's saucepan example, he thinks that it seems related to management training, quality improvement. Can you talk a little more where personal initiative training comes in this example?
Gladly. So the example here is, number one is we never ever suggested what they should do, okay? So it was never our idea, it was always their idea. That they said, hey, look at my saucepans, I can actually do better in terms of quality than I can at this moment. And so this was his idea, self-starting. The second thing was that he said, long term, I don't have much of a chance to sell my saucepans in the market. You know, there's this outside market that they sell it in, and I don't have a good chance to really get good profit rates on that. You know, I have to make them cheaply, but I have to sell them cheaply. So that's future orientation. The third one is he had to go back and back and back again, and he searched for really, really nasty negative feedback because he was told these are really very bad saucepans, and he had to work on them again and again and again. So that's overcoming barriers. I think that's a nice example of what personal initiative does to you.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Quite frequently, that's the fascinating thing. I mean, to be quite honest, whenever you just describe theory, it's always so dry. But these are, you know, like there was a flooding in Uganda at one point in time after we had done the training, and the reaction was completely different. In the control group, the people said, "Oh, it was awful. You know, I had to deal with the flood, etc., etc." And the other one, they said, "Well, I took this as a starting point to find a new place for my business. I had always thought about the new place, but I had never really put it into action. Now I did." Yeah? So there's a completely different way of looking at the same disaster situation, and there are lots of examples such as this one that I find fascinating from a personal initiative.
Okay, Fernando.
Yes. The second question comes from Ilka, our colleague. She asks you, as a researcher in the field of psychology, and again taking the case of Africa, how to reduce dissonance associated with self-esteem and less resources and turn individuals into entrepreneurs with action. And she also asks if you know Paulo Freire, our famous Brazilian educator.
I think I do. I think I've read it, but to be quite honest, I wouldn't be able to really describe the theory by Freire. But what I can say is the following. We are not in the business of teaching people higher self-esteem, but we are in the business of telling people that they should act. And they should not act blindly, but they should experiment with their actions. And why should they experiment with an action? Because in experiments, you can do things where you're not yet absolutely certain that it will work out. And because you know that you will make errors, you will hedge. You won't put all the money into your experiment. And so you will be better in terms of the experiment. You know, it's like the saucepan. You don't put all the money in it. You were still, while he was improving his saucepans, he was still selling his bad saucepans in the market. Yeah? And he could continue on. If it had failed completely, he would have just, you know, it wouldn't have been a terrible problem either. But the point was he tried. And the trying, once you try, and once you succeed a little bit, it actually helps you to be more daring the next time. And that, I think, is the major advance that you see. So I don't think that it is that we really, in itself, target self-esteem, but that we target people daring to become better and thereby increasing their self-esteem.
Fernando, may I put a question now? Fernando? Yeah? Okay, Professor Michael Frese, how you could be comparing this action theory, and especially the action theory training, by regard to the paradigms of causation and effectuation? Because at certain points, it does seem that you are emphasizing with people that they should act, but act in a kind of a linear sequence, going from the goals to the action, to the corrections, etc. And there are points in when you speak about this training that it does seem that you are stimulating them to effectuate. Can you compare for us?
Yes, these are the data. On this one, I have data. Can you still see them?
Yes.
Yeah. What you see here is we measured causation, we measured the 4 parts of effectuation: experimentation, affordable loss, flexibility, and pre-commitments. And what you see is that by and large, causation is positively correlated with the effectuation criteria, with the exception of experimentation. So you see the blue correlations, minus 0.19, so that's the only minus correlation there. 0.13, okay, so it's not significant. 0.20 and 0.32, a sizable correlation. So in other words, yes, I do both. That's another one of those things. I always want to overcome dualities, and dualities between that's, I think, what action theory really does, the duality between mind and doing, between just thinking about it and doing things. This duality is, in my mind, needs to be overcome, and that's why it is indeed, we do effectuation and causation. We plan and do things. We experiment, etc. Yeah?
Yeah. Another thing that I'd like you to talk about. In which way you could be comparing this training based on action theory and the training that in the 80s and 90s until today is being offered by United Nations under the name of Empretec training, that is based on the 10 competencies that were validated by the research of the McClellan team in the 80s.
Yeah. The Empretec training is a fascinating and good training. It's very much influenced by the McClellan approach of training. I have no problems with that. The only problem I have is that I wish there were a randomized controlled experiment on the Empretec training. Now, where is ours different from Empretec? Now, quite frankly, if you would ask me now, give a 5 minutes talk about what Empretec training does, I probably wouldn't master that task. But I do think what it does, it encourages people to be more achievement-oriented, to be more thoughtful about what they want to achieve, and it increases their ideas of what they can achieve in terms of goals. That's great. And on that one, we all agree. Where we probably are slightly different is that in personal initiative training, there is more of this connection between how do you get from one place to the next one. Okay, so again, it's the issue of goal and plan, of goal and negative feedback, etc. These kinds of things. So I'm not saying that Empretech training doesn't have an overlap with that, but it doesn't accentuate this. Okay, and that's why I personally like our. But I mean, quite frankly, I have been influenced by the traditional, really classic kinds of entrepreneurship trainings that have been done in this tradition. So I'm not arguing against them, but I do think that that we are somewhat cleaner in our orientation. That's all. No?
Okay. Professor Frese, we have two more questions. I'd like to put the first one. The first one is from our former president of the association, Professor Vanya, and she asks you, are affective aspects, emotions, being considered in an action theory of entrepreneurship?
Is emotion considered?
Yes, affective aspects.
Affective processes, yeah.
Yes.
I didn't talk about the affective processes, but I hope you, just to be absolutely clear one more time, affective processes have been described by me at several places. And here it's probably most, I jumped over that one. It's probably the most extreme case. And it also gives a bit of an answer to the question on the self-esteem issue. Here, we studied the effect of errors on people and what they did in terms of analysis. And we studied, I go from the back upwards, okay, from helpless analysis up here. And what we found was we looked at how people described their reactions to errors, to negative feedback. Some said helplessly, I have no idea what I have been doing. I don't know what I'm doing. These are software. This was a software, so it wasn't entrepreneurship, but you know, the kind of idea is the same. I'm helpless. I don't know what to do. The next one was trial and error. Oh, let me try this. Oh, let me try that. Oh, let me try that. And without thought, without thinking about it. The one that was best in terms of producing transfer performance later on was self-reflective analysis. And now let's go back one more time. And you see here, there are two mediators. One is emotion control, which primarily means control of negative affect when you make an error. The other one is metacognitive activity, which means where am I? What am I just doing? In which direction do I have to do now? And what is the next hypothesis that I have where I can make an experiment? And what you see here is these two things produce the effect of good transfer performance. And when we talk to people who have gone through our trainings later on, they often say, I have been through so much shit, through so many problems, so many difficulties. And I always was thinking back, I will have problems, I will make errors, and I will nevertheless continue on overcoming barriers. This is, of course, an affective mind. Yeah? It's an affective approach. Now, did we study that in enough detail? No. Do we know that this exists? Yes, because we do study and we do measure self-efficacy. And of course, self-efficacy means, do I believe that I can do? Yeah? And that increases tremendously because of personal initiative training. But it's not a causal factor. So it does increase, but it's not the factor that actually produces then higher profitability. There we think that it is more these kinds of things like innovativeness and not giving up and start continuing on, etc. That are the more important factors, or having a higher, a wider range of products and services.
I have a final question. I think we're approaching our time, but I think we can answer this one as well, please. Edmundo asked if this action theory can be translated to personal fields of improvement like arts, sports, and so on, and not only to create businesses.
Can you say that one more time? I didn't understand it yet.
Okay, Edmundo is asking if we can apply action theory perspective, psychology perspective, to other fields like arts, performance, sports performance, and so on. Absolutely,
absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I think if you have case studies on famous artists, of course, you see that they have very similar kinds of things. Whenever you do something that is self-starting and new, of course, you also need the other components. Yeah? So therefore, you can apply it to other areas. And let me just say one more word. I actually studied clinical psychology at one point in time. Quite frankly, I did not want to continue to be a clinical psychologist. Primarily because it was a bit boring, I thought, after a while. It was always the same kinds of problems. People had the same issues. I wanted something that's faster, that works better and faster. And in a way, I turned to cognitive approaches. I studied with Beck and I studied with Ellis, or with a student of Ellis when I was a professor, young professor in the United States. And this all helped me. The rational emotive therapy all helped me. And I actually teach rational emotive therapy in the trainings because I think it's so important. And obviously there are high relationships between what I'm suggesting and what is suggested in these other areas. And people have used action theory, of course, in the educational field.
Fernando, may I put you just one last question because you have 5 minutes more? Yeah. Professor Frese, can you describe just briefly how this training is administered? It means duration, the profile of the entrepreneurs, the frequency, etc.
Mm-hmm. The training itself is usually around 24 hours. And sometimes we distribute it across time, like every week 4 hours. And sometimes we have it like on a every second day kind of basis, sometimes for 8 hours or 6 hours a day. So we have different types of approaches there. We have not done that systematically, quite frankly. And it's just, these are expensive studies, as you know, and people are not interested whether we give it this way or that way. But this is the strategy. We always, except in the very beginning of our training, of the development of our training, we always have local trainers. This is important because they don't need another white face to tell them what they should be doing. I mean, we don't tell them what they should be doing anyhow, but they don't need another white face. What is that? What does that mean? It means that we take people who can translate these kinds of ideas into things that make sense culturally and are culturally appropriate. So in that way, we take out the problem that, of course, we don't know the culture in depth in each one of those training sites that we do it. And they take it into it. So we need people who are really very smart in applying this kind of thing. So we also have to do a really good training with the trainers themselves. And we didn't always. We have had bad trainers, and then this training doesn't work very well.
But afterwards, after the training, do they have a follow-up with mentors or not?
We have had follow-up with mentors, and we have had not follow-up with mentors, and it didn't seem to be the most decisive factor. If it had been a decisive factor, then the classical business training would have worked very well as well, because they also had mentors. So it's not the mentorship that is important, but we don't know yet. On that one, quite frankly, I believe that we haven't really done our research well enough yet. What we want to do now is we want to use much more boosters that we are using per videos or per SMSs that remind people of the principles of personal initiative. That is one way where we think that we can actually make the mentorship immaterial, but we don't know yet. So we're just now doing a 10-year follow-up study, and in Togo we have just done a qualitative study, also in Togo with people another a year ago. So we're still sticking with them to find out what were the most important factors that contributed to success and failure.
And it does seem to be very interesting if you have local partners here to be trying this training and measuring here the results. So it'd be a very good opportunity for Brazil also. So, yeah. Fernando, for your closing
we have reached our time, Professor. We have also 2 more questions, but since they may take quite a time for you to answer, I ask if you would mind if I send them by email to you, and then you answer later. Can it be?
Sure.
Okay. Then I would like you to say that we do appreciate your kindness in accepting our invitation to give this brilliant talk for us. I have learned a lot with you, and I think most of people have learned as well. And I hope someday we can meet you in Brazil in a real life situation, in a event, so we can. Okay.
Yeah, that
and
would
Rose,
be wonderful.
I think Rose could finish this session.
Okay, thank you so much, and
Thank you very much.
Appreciated the invitation. Okay, all the best.
So just to call attention for our audience, that is a big contribution that Professor Frese brings to entrepreneurship, emphasizing the role that psychology could play in terms of improving, especially the area of education training, that he has contributed a lot in terms of his research and also with his students and colleagues. And he really has played a big role in terms of putting back psychology in the field of entrepreneurship. So please pay attention to psychology, because usually we use a lot the concepts of psychology, but people that comes from management or other fields are not knowledgeable about. So, and they don't really deal with the depths or the real knowledge of what these concepts should be given. Professor?
Thank you very much. I agree, and I hope I see you all soon, and stay safe.
Okay, and thank you very much.
Well.
It was really a pleasure having you. Very nice, very enrichful, very rich. Okay.